When we think about starting a pecan, we usually visualize something like this nursery row that is at the OSU Pecan and Fruit Research Station in Perkins, Oklahoma, where nuts were planted 2 years ago, and now they're young trees that are ready to be dug. And visiting with us is Dr. Dean McCraw. He's our Extension Pecan Tree Specialist for OSU. And Dean, that's a pretty nice looking root system. Is that really one that could be transplanted and be off and running in a few years?
Sure is, Sue. I dig this thing in February, put it in the ground in February, and you're ready to go.
Okay, now one thing I want to mention is that most people just think about planting any old pecan, but there are actually certain varieties that make a better rootstock on the tree.
We've learned, and it's pretty clear, that rootstock on pecan is just as important as it is on any other type of tree crop. Cold hardiness and maturity and those kinds of things.
Okay, and what varieties do you recommend to be planted from nuts to make a good rootstock?
The best one actually is a native, an adapted native from the area. For the northern part of the state, we like to use cold hardy varieties like Peruke or Colby or Giles or those,
okay.
but an area native does a good job.
Great.
We also would look at an alternative method of growing the plant. As you can see there, we've got about a foot of root system, and we've got a cut there. And most of the new roots are going to generate from there rather than up along here. If we would, instead of planting the nut in the ground, that's what was done here, then take that nut and plant it in a container, we can grow a better tree in actually a shorter time.
Now, before this was planted in the container, though, it was stratified, and
that's correct.
That's a method we talk about a lot for gardeners for starting acorns or most any woody plant from seed. Is that it's got to have a cold treatment where it's after ripening, and you don't put it in the freezer.
That's right. Yeah, it's very important that it's cool but not freezing. The ideal temperature is about 40 degrees.
40 degrees for about 90 days?
Something like that.
And moist?
It varies some, but in a moist material for about 90 days or so.
And then they are potted up into these open-ended milk cartons.
That's right. We take those and we set these milk cartons on a wire so that as it grows out, these were actually put in there in April after the freeze date, and then as the root develops, it comes down and the air prunes it off. You can see the volume of fibrous roots there, and there's actually the end of the taproot right there, which would be the same as we had on the other tree, which we really don't need. The important things are these guys right here.
Right, and that will go down for anchoring later on.
That's
right.
Right
Now we need a good fibrous tree for transplanting. And I want to emphasize another new method or step in between those two is that after stratification you can actually pre-germinate before you put them in these.
That's correct. All that does really is cut down on the vacancies that you have, because you know that the nut is going to be germinated. It's going to be a viable nut because it'll be germinated before you put it in the container.
Okay, but you could take them out of stratification, float them in a fish tank of water, aerated it for about a week? About a week,
sometimes as much as 10 days, but for that length of time, then after that length of time, then the radicle will begin to emerge and the nut will be cracked, and you know when you plant it that it's going to be a viable nut.
You know you got a good one.
That's
okay,
right.
Then put in milk cartons, and then a year later it's ready to transplant. Well, let's go take a look at some that have been put in the field and give you all an idea of proper spacing for pecans. Well, Dean, it doesn't take long, as we can see, before get these in the ground, they start to really look like something.
That's right. Start to look like a tree, don't they?
Yeah. Now, how long's this one been here?
This one is just finishing its second growing season.
Okay, and next spring you'll be able to graft that.
That's right. We'll graft this probably in late April, early May of next year.
Okay, and I want to mention that pecan growers' year does start in January and early February, and they start collecting graft wood, and then they actually have to hold that in cold storage.
That's right.
So they can graft in April and May, and the spacing out here looks huge probably to you all, but it's necessary. Now, how far apart are these spaced?
Yeah, it looks pretty wide right now. It's 35 by 35, but in a few years they'll be too crowded, and about half of them will have to come out after about 20 years.
So they'll take them out in a checkerboard pattern?
Kind of like that. It's diagonal thin, every other tree and every other row that leaves about half of them and widens them out, and this space will be filled in.
Okay, yeah, the trees will get pretty huge, and it's a long-term process, but it surprises me how many people, some of them in their early 70s, will call our office. They want to know how to graft, and they say, I'm doing this for my grandchildren.
Yeah, that's right. That's
just
right.
looking ahead to the future, it does take a while. Let's talk a little bit about varieties, Dean. This is a native that's been planted here, and according to the sign, it's going to be planted with mountain variety. But when a homeowner or a person thinking about pecans comes to an extension office and picks up the OSU variety fact sheet, it can be bewildering to try to decide which ones to plant.
It's very difficult, so it's probably one of the most frustrating things is to try to advise someone on varieties, but we know that when we plant, we got to graft something on there so we know what it's going to be.
Right.
When we plant the seed, then we don't know exactly what the parentage of that is. So in Oklahoma, we need to ensure that if we're in the northern part of the state, that we have northern varieties that have some cold resistance. We can use some different ones on farther south toward the Red River. We just don't have a clear definition of what we need to use, but we know that varieties like Mount that are selected, Mount and Merrimack were selected from seedlings or natives in Oklahoma that would probably be pretty good choices.
So I know that they do well, and,
yeah.
and on the what people call paper shell varieties or improved varieties, they do have a thinner shell. They're going to fill out better, be more disease resistant.
That's exactly right.
Give you a more consistent crop, but it's a big decision and one that's can be changed down the road with top working. But,
yeah, it can be changed, but it costs time when you do that.
Sure. Now the type of graft that people will do on here, of course, in propagating plants in horticulture, there are many types of grafts, but with a pecan this size, what type of graft would you recommend?
Oh, we'd probably four-flap that, Sue, and more than likely would come back in and cut that off about there and pair that with a sign about the same size and use a four-flap graft.
Yeah, and if they have a larger pecan tree, say one that's about 4-inch diameter, they could go in with a bark graft.
That's right, use an inlaid bark graft.
Okay, and those probably, I guess, are the two most popular with pecan growers.
Probably so.
A lot of times in the spring around Oklahoma, there are grafting classes taught in different counties around the state. You can check with those. Also, OSU has produced a video on grafting pecans that you can arrange to borrow through your county extension office. And if you really want to get into pecans, Dean, there's a class coming up they can take. Is that
That's
right?
A pecan grower short course for beginners in the pecan business that want to learn more about the ins and outs of growing pecans. Over at Tulsa, it'll be the first weekend of January. Information will be available through the county extension offices in late November, early December.
Okay, well I know that short course, it's the same one that was taught last year. We had a big crowd there. We want to make sure people know about it, and that in that 2 days you can pretty well learn everything from soup to nuts.
That's right. We'll go through it all, and it'll be it was well received last year.
Great. Well, pecans do take some planning, but before you know it, you do have an orchard of some good size, and I understand you've got some here on the station. They're just about ready for harvest. Let's go take a look at those.
All right.
Well, Dean, after stratifying the pecans, planting the nut, growing the tree, watering, weeding it, grafting it, looks like the rewards are about to come to fruition on this one. Now, how old is this tree?
The graft has been on here probably for about 10 to 12 years, something in that line. Patience is a virtue in the pecan business.
Oh, you bet. But still,
no
it's amazing how time flies, and pretty soon you do have a nice orchard ready to harvest. And looks like this one's just about ready. Now, this is Merrimack variety, right?
This is Merrimack, and we can see very clearly that the shuck has begun to split, and these are about ready to start falling. Can be shaken probably in another few days.
All right. Now, a tree, shakers come in different sizes, as we'll show you all in the harvest video in a minute or two, but a tree this age can be shaken with a small enough shaker, right?
Yes, very clearly. Depending on you size the shaker with the size of the tree, and anywhere from 4 inches on up to 36 inches in diameter or more can easily be shaken. A good point also to remember is that the nut is mature actually before that split starts, so you don't really have to have a frost before the nuts actually mature and begun to separate.
But this does have to be opening.
That's right. For that to fall out, for that thing out, that needs to be open.
You've got one there in your hand here. That's a common question we get at extension offices is if we have a freeze and the shuck freezes around the nut, or if one falls before the shuck opens, people want to know if that nut's still good. And you've got one there that.
That's right. This one didn't separate. This one probably would not have separated before it fell from a tree for whatever reason. It got knocked off or something, but that one's not going to separate. If it has matured to the point that that you can squeeze and feel some shaking inside. Then it will go ahead and separate after it's on the ground.
Okay.
Those that were frozen in the shuck won't separate after they get on the ground.
And that's always a tragedy for pecan growers if we get through
Yes,
a
it
whole
is.
season and then we get an early freeze.
Yes, it is.
And you have your crop just stuck up in the tree and literally
Yeah.
can do nothing about
That's
it.
right.
But now these are looking really
These
beautiful.
guys are.
And Dean and I cut these open a little ahead of time just to take a look at nut quality. Of course, we mentioned this is Merrimack variety, and there's the kernel. And nice thing about pecans grown in Oklahoma is they always have that nice, bright,
You
light
bet.
color,
You
good
bet.
quality.
Is this a great place to live? You bet it is.
Yeah.
But look at that. You can see how that thing is filled through there, how that, there's no air pockets in there. That's a nice pecan.
Okay, that's a real high quality pecan. But then we've got one here that maybe didn't fill out quite so well. And what do you think has gone on here that it didn't fill out as well as this, even though it maybe came off the same tree?
That's a source sink type thing. Depending on where the nut's located on the tree, it may not have reaped the benefits of the leaves as much. Fill is also a function of water.
Okay. Just a moisture and then a source of nutrients
That's
on
right.
the tree. And
That's
just
right.
like with peaches and apples, very often the ones that are close to a lot of leaves and a healthy part of the tree, and with those, of course, out in full sun, they're going to ripen up better.
Yeah. If the nut's located farther back down on the lateral shoot versus the terminal shoot, then they'll feel differently.
That's interesting. Well, now, out in a situation like this, you get an orchard planted, say, in a small acreage, and you're real proud of it, and you're ready for harvest. Pretty soon you start getting some predators coming in. What can we do about jays and crows?
They're really bad guys, Sue. Those blue jays and crows carry off a substantial amount, and really about the only thing that we can do is we can use scare guns, propane cannons that'll scare them to some extent, or like balloon-looking eyeballs that people hang in the trees, and some of those things do help. It's important to change those around, change the frequency of the blast on the crow cannon, or change the location of the balloon so that crows are pretty smart animals. They get used to it pretty quickly, and they'll find out what you're doing, and you have to try to outsmart them, which is a challenge.
Yeah, I want to keep them guessing. And,
Yes.
and on squirrels, of course, you don't want your orchard located right next to a forest.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And squirrels are probably worse than crows. They carry off many nuts, and ideally, we just locate where there's no woods around, and in a backyard situation, sometimes it's difficult. Live traps maybe to take them away and get rid of the pest. But
Okay, great. Well, Dean, I sure want to thank you for visiting with us. We're going to head on to a commercial orchard in the Bixby area and see how they get them harvested on a large scale.
very good. Glad to be here.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.